This next lesson is what I'm going to call the well at Bethlehem. It actually occurred years before. And they're retelling a story of some of the heroes of David. These are some of his mighty men. And this happened during the time of King Saul, when Saul was trying to kill David, when he's hiding in the cave of Adullam. And so they're retelling a story that happened many years ago, and going to talk about some of David's mighty men who become heroes of Israel. The well at Bethlehem. Anyone that is going to be successful as a leader has got to build a team. You can't do this alone. You not only need help, but the task is too big for you. And what God has called David to do is to establish a kingdom. A kingdom. You can't do that alone. And so what David did, David built not just his family. It takes more. A lot of churches get stuck at that style of just family style. You've got to outgrow that, because there's more than just one family or two, three families. If you're going to reach a community, you've got to reach a community. You've got to think kingdom. And so David builds a very diverse team that surrounds him to help him establish the kingdom of Israel. And I pointed out, David not only accepted Israelites, he accepted Philistines, he accepted different people. I think that is one of the unique things for David, because Israel never really became a missionary nation. They were always interested in the Jews, the Israelites, and they didn't think anything about the people around them. And yet the commandment of God, all the way back under the writings of Moses in the book of Leviticus, love your neighbor as your own self. They didn't do that. They loved their family, but you never see them really loving their neighbors, the nations that were around them. During the time of Saul's reign, he is, of course, not only has driven David out, and David is living in a cave, but there's one day in this cave that David has a longing to go back home to Bethlehem. The Philistines had captured Bethlehem. And that's very interesting. This city that really is located very close to Jerusalem is a long way from Philistine territory. So they have moved way up into the mountains away from the sea, and they have conquered David's hometown. He's out in the desert with his men. They're hiding in the cave of Adullam. And one day, and this is just a leader talking. I don't think he really meant for his men to do anything here. I've been going to Chiapas, Mexico for so many years, 45 years. I have to be very careful what I say or do there, because they will take it like a word from God, and sometimes you're just talking. You're just thinking and trying to process something, but you have to be careful. That's what happens for David here. I don't think this was any command of his. He didn't intend for his men to do anything, but David is longing for the life that he had at Bethlehem, when life was a lot simpler. And he just simply says, "Oh, that I had a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem." Just a simple longing of his heart. However, his men heard him when he said that. And there were 3 of his men that rose up, fought their way all through the Philistine enemy lines to the well at Bethlehem, draw some water, fight their way back through the enemy lines of the Philistines to David to give him a drink of water. Wow, what a story. No wonder they're still talking about it. And this is many years afterward, what those men did to give their leader a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem. Let's see what we can learn from this story. The first thing, I'll call it a call for simplicity. Because David is thinking about when he was a boy, a shepherd boy for his father. And as he would take care of the sheep, he would come home and there's the well at Bethlehem. But life gets so complicated, doesn't it? I mean, now it's not just you, but it's you and your wife. And then it's not just you and your wife, but it's you and your wife and your 4 children. And then there's what we call the extended families, all the in-laws and sometimes outlaws too. I mean, life can get complicated, can't it? And suddenly, it's not just you anymore. That's what's happening to David. David remembers when he was just a boy. And he said, man, I didn't realize how good home was. I didn't realize how good I had it. And I would come to the well of Bethlehem and get a drink of water. It's a call for simplicity. Now, I think there are times that we need to just stop and reevaluate our lives, and some things that we're doing we need to stop doing so that we can simplify things. But it's never going to be like it was when you were young. It's never going to be when you were a child, a boy, a shepherd boy that's taking care of his father's sheep. But now life has become so complicated for David. Instead of just being sheep, his life is filled with kings, with enemy soldiers, with armies. Life can get so complicated. And I can assure you, from my perspective in life, that is exactly what it does. It gets more and more complicated. So that now, in ministry, I started out just a boy preacher, and all I'm thinking about is getting a message and preaching to the people. And then suddenly you're put in leadership positions where you're responsible for these young people. And I've got to now think about the group. And then you become a pastor of a church. And then now, oh, may God have mercy. I think of what Paul said when he's talking about all the things that came upon him in 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter. And he said, and on top of all this, the care of all the churches that came upon me daily. I just got a text from Mexico this week, and one of my Timothys, one of my spiritual sons, that he's just purchased a new warehouse building. I say new, it's a warehouse building. It'll be a new place for his church, and they're going to start the renovation. And he's saying, please, can you come on the first Sunday of May? We're going to dedicate this building. I've got to figure out some kind of way how I can get to Mexico City and help him, because that's my boy. That's one of my Timothys. And so life gets so complicated. That's what David is saying. It's a cry of simplicity. There's a second cry that I want you to see. A call for refreshment. He's in the desert. That's where the cave of Adullam is located. The Bible calls it a wilderness, but the best way we could describe it is a desert wilderness, a desolate place. And so where the cave of Adullam is, it's nothing but rocks and dirt. It's just a dry desert place. And so in this place, he gets so thirsty. See, life becomes so draining as it goes on. David is experiencing this. Oh, that I had a drink of water from the well in Bethlehem. It's so hot. I'm so thirsty. If I just had a drink. And it's just wishful longing. It's not a command. It's just David saying, I wish I remember how good the water was out of the well of Bethlehem. I sure wish I had a drink of water from that well. Now, as he remembers this, let me back this up. He remembers how good it tasted, how good it was. Now listen to me carefully here. Thank God for the good memories. They're wonderful. There are things that bless us. Thank God for that. But you're never going to be able to go back to that again. You can't relive that again. David, by longing for the well at Bethlehem, is acknowledging something. The enemy has stolen the place of refreshment. Now, what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to dig a new well. You're going to have to find a new spring. Because you can't go back to Bethlehem without a fight. And he's not in a position yet to fight the Philistines. King Saul's trying to kill him. And he's having to hide from King Saul. And so, what he is saying, if I had the refreshment of a drink of water from Bethlehem, and that's what his men responded to. The devil will do that in our lives. So remember the good times. They're good memories, but you can't live there. You can't go back there and do it again. You've got to find a new well, a new source of life. And David does that. If you'll go back and read the story from Adullam, he then goes to En-Gedi. And if you ever go to En-Gedi, one of the things that you're going to notice is all the greenery that's growing out of this brown desert area, because there is a spring in En-Gedi. You have to find that. So it's a cry for refreshment. A cry saying, I wish someone would refresh my soul. The third thing that I will say, it's a call for deliverance. Deliverance. And this has to do with the Philistine army. Because the army is there, and life has become so difficult for him now. The Philistines are in control of the well. Boy, it happens. It happened in David's life. It really wasn't his fault. King Saul was the one responsible. But Saul had allowed the enemy to come in, not only capture Bethlehem, but to capture the well. That's what David is saying. It's a call for deliverance. A call that I wish that we had the ability to destroy our enemy here so that we could recapture the well again. It's a warning to every one of us. Don't allow the enemy to control the wells of your life. Those are things that you need to fight for. David can't return to Bethlehem without a fight. Now, let me point out something. There's approximately 600 men that's with David now. It started out with 400 men, but by the time he left Adullam, and he's got 600 men that have gathered together with him. They're watching him to see what he's going to do. That's the way it is in leadership. As I said, leaders live in glass houses. People watch them. They watch them. What leaders actually do, they become people's link, and I'm talking about spiritual leaders here, like pastors and those that are in spiritual positions of churches. You become people's link with God. No, you're not God, but you represent God. And they look to you to help them with their spiritual problems. And even though David has God's anointing on his life, the enemy is still in control of the well. His men are watching him to see what he's going to do about this. Let me give you a story to help illustrate this. They tell the story about the rabbi that was getting up in years from New York City. And he was, I believe, in his 80s. And, of course, one of his dreams was to go back to Jerusalem. And so his children wanted to take him to Jerusalem before he was not able to travel and go there. And so they put him in first class on the airplane, flying back to Jerusalem. They're riding in coach in back of the plane in the economy class. But they're continually coming up and checking on their father. Father, do you need a drink of water? Father, would you like something to eat? And they're just constantly coming up to check on him. There is an atheist that is seated next to this rabbi. Well, it's quite obvious the rabbi is a Jewish leader, so the atheist begins to give him all kinds of trouble. He's mocking his religion, he's mocking his God, he's mocking his faith in God, and just trying to quarrel with the old rabbi. Finally, after some time, the rabbi's children coming up and asking, is there anything you need, Father? Can we help you? Is there anything you want? And so the atheist turns to the old rabbi and he said, well, one thing I will say for you. I wish my children respected me like your children respect you. My children don't show any respect like that. The old rabbi replied, he said, I am my children's link with God. I taught them how to pray. I taught them God's word. I taught them who God is. I am their link with God. Now, for you, as an atheist, you are your children's link with a monkey. That illustrates it very well, because he doesn't believe in God. All he believes in evolution. And he said, you are your children's link with a monkey, with an orangutan. Now, this is one of the things I have discovered, and it's one of the things that weighs most heavily upon my heart, my life, is I recognize people watch me. And I know that I'm not God. I'm just a man, but I must be God's man. I must represent him. And the greatest power that you have as a leader is the influence you have upon people's lives spiritually. They look at you like their link with God. Can you help us? Can you give us a word from God? Can you give us counsel? Can you pray with us? Can you help us believe? That's what David is having to do for his men. They're watching him because they know God's anointing is upon him, and they're believing that God is going to use David to make their lives better. So when David says this, oh, that I could have a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem, it spoke very deeply to them. They believed in him. They weren't just following a man, they were following a man of God. You can get the clicker, there we go. Your friends watch you, then they help to determine your destiny. David had 3 men. They became his 3 top men, 1, 2, and 3 of his army. Of the mighty men, these were the 3 that stood out above everybody else. And they helped David to accomplish establishing the kingdom of Israel. Let's look at them and see what they represent. The first one was a man by the name of Adino. Adino is one of the 3 that responds to David's cry, oh, I wish I had a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem. And he fights his way through enemy lines to bring back a drink of water for David. Adino, I say he answered with courage. Adino did something that even David did not do. The Bible said of Adino, he killed 800 men in one battle. Now, we don't have any of the details of that. We don't know exactly where it happened, when it happened, how it happened, how it took place. All we know, we have recorded, he killed 800 men in one battle. People never forgot what Adino did. Now, the truth is, if you're going to be a good leader, you've got to have people like Adino on your team. People that can do things that you can't even do. I wish you could understand. Don't you know? I preach to people that are smarter than me. I was down just with the Chamulas in Chiapas, Mexico, just a month ago, and I was talking to one of the young leaders there. He's like a grandson to me, actually, and the church that he has established there it's an amazing story. But this young man is fluent in 3 languages, is learning a 4th. He speaks English, Spanish, so chill, And now, because he is a principal over a school in a different indigenous group of people, he's learning a fourth language. That's not fair. I can hardly speak English. And and that's not fair. The truth is, he's smarter than I am. He's got IQ that I don't have. He's got a gift for language that I don't have. We must not be intimidated by people that actually have greater gifts than we have. We need them. David needs a Dino. And a Dino can do something David can't even do. David killed Goliath, but David never killed 800 men in one battle. Wow, what a testimony. This man is the star of the team. It's no wonder he became David's number one man. When he come to his heroes, he said, and these three were the top ones. The first was a Dino. There's another one, though. The second one was a man by the name of Eleazar. And I say for him, he answers with loyalty. Loyalty is a word that we have lost in the United States. People are not loyal anymore. It's basically, they live by the rule, what have you done for me lately? And if things are not going the way that they'll walk out, they'll turn back. But we have lost something very precious in our culture. Loyalty. I am old enough now, I can remember my fathers, my grandfathers, and man, for instance, my dad, he always drove a Chevrolet, or we would say in Arkansas, a Chevrolet. My dad would, I don't know what he would say if he knew I'm driving a Toyota. I mean, that's Japanese, boy. I mean, he was loyal to the USA. And loyalty, we've lost that. We have lost that in our culture. Eleazar, let me show you what he did. This man, the Bible talks about him, that he is in a battle against the enemy. He's fighting, and everybody else runs away. Except Eleazar. He doesn't run away. It said he stood and he fought until the sword was welded to his hand. Now, what does that mean? That means that the blood is dripping down from the sword. It's running down from the sword as he's fighting. And as it runs down upon his hand that is clutching the sword, it dries to the point that it's glued his hand to the sword. He can't turn the sword loose. That's loyalty. That's loyalty. God give us people like that. People that, in ministry, I have people ask me a lot, about, well, when are you going to retire? What are you talking about, retire? This is not a profession. This is a call of God. There is a big difference in being a man of God and being God's man. You got to know that. You have to know that. And as long as I can be effective, as long as I can do what God has called me to do, to my dying breath, I will be a preacher. That's what I was born to do. You've got to be welded to it. Do you understand? This is not a profession that we do it so that we can get a paycheck. We do it. No, it's a call of God. Eleazar, his hand was welded to the sword. He couldn't turn it loose. It's like they tell the story about the man that was going to get a hold of the billy goat. The goat, and he grabs the goat by the horns, but the goat is so strong, he can't control it. And the goat is pulling him around, and he starts yelling, "Somebody come help me turn this thing loose." That's the way it is when God calls you. If you answer the call of God, it takes control in your life. That God becomes number one for you. Eleazar's victory was complete. The Bible said when the Israelite soldiers turned around and saw what he had done, he had won the victory. there was no enemy left to fight. He had destroyed them all. And it said the Israelites only come and followed him to gather up the spoils of the battle. He had won complete victory. Boy, it is no wonder David was able to accomplish some of the things that he did. Let me give you a third one. A third one was by the name of Shammah. Shammah. Shammah answers David's call. He's one of the three top mighty men in David's heroes. He answers the call with faithfulness. Now, let me show you what I mean by this. Most people looked at the battlefield that day, and the Bible said it was a field filled with beans, a bean field. For most folks, that's not worth fighting over. But for Shammah, Shammah looks at that and he says, no, that's not just a bean field, that's our harvest. Our harvest. We have labored all year for that. And you think we're going to turn that over to the enemy? And so the Bible said he stood in the middle of the bean field and he fought until he had complete victory. Here's something else that Shammah understood concerning the bean field. He knew that it's not just a harvest, but the seed they're going to need to plant for next year is contained in that harvest. That's what makes him fight so hard, is he realizes if we give this up to the enemy, we're going to starve not just this winter, but we don't have anything to plant next year. If you're going to be successful in following God and doing what God's called you to do, you've got to learn to think long term. Think of the harvest. Think of next year. We've got to have seed to plant. And so when people look at it, they just saw a bean field. That's not what Shammah saw. Shammah looked at that and he said, we have got to save the harvest because the harvest has what we call seed corn, the seed that we're going to need for next year. That's why every generation is important. Do you understand? We're always only one generation away from apostasy. The book of Judges teaches us that. That's why it's so important that you teach your children so they can teach your grandchildren. We have to continue to teach and preach the gospel to each generation. I remember once my daughter, she was asking me a question about something that her friends were discussing at school, and I answered her question, but then I asked her, what do you think about it? She said, oh, Daddy, you brainwashed us. And I did. You better believe I did. What did she mean by brainwash? Her mother and I lived the gospel in front of her. We taught her the Bible. But then we took her to church. We didn't just take her to church, though. Then we sent her to a Christian school. Why? A threefold cord is not easily broken. And so we want everything that's speaking into her young life as she's growing and maturing and adapting. We want it all to be Bible. We want it to be biblical. And that's why she said, you brainwashed us. That was intentional. I wanted to make sure she knew what the Bible said and why the Bible said it. So many people don't have that. And because they don't have that, that's why they fail when they have to go and face the world on their own. Shammah, he would not allow the enemy to destroy the harvest. Now, in talking about this, great teams require great giftings and diverse giftings. And that's what these men represent. Not just one type. You need many different types of people. The different gifts that people have, embrace them. It's one of the weaknesses of so many churches is everybody is alike. We need different kinds of people, different ethnic groups of people. We need different cultures. That's the way heaven's going to be. Heaven is, don't think, and this is one of the things I tease people all the time, try to make them think is, God's not white. Only 30% of the world is white. The rest is a different color. God is above all of that. God made white, black, brown, yellow. God made us all. And that's one of the great things that heaven's going to be. There's going to be such a diversity that is there. Oh, I love that when I experienced that in a church. David understood what these three men had done was something he did not deserve. They loved him so much that they had offered him something. What they actually offered to him only belonged to God. And when God has used your life, you're going to experience this. People will give you things you don't deserve. What do? Give them back to God. That's what David did. It seems so strange to a lot of people. They fought their way through the enemy lines. They drew the water out of the well of Bethlehem. They fight their way back through the enemy. And they come to David and they offer him a drink of water. And he says, I'm not worthy of this. Only God is worthy of this. And he takes the water and he pours it out on the ground before God. Now, for a lot of people, they think he's wasting the water. How could he do such a thing when they've risked their lives? No, he's not wasting the water. He's making an altar. He's offering a sacrifice to God. And he's saying, I'm not worthy of that kind of love. I'm not worthy of that kind of devotion. That's worship. Worship only belongs to God. And so he points them toward God. No wonder these men loved him so much. No wonder they watched him that day. They knew what they had fought, what they had been through. They realized he has turned this into an act of worship. There's three things that we read Jesus taught us. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. They don't belong to us. I think this is what happens to a lot of good men and women. They begin to take those things. I learned this from a great man of God, taught me this years ago, and I've tried to practice it ever since. Because people will come to you and they mean well, you know, it's out of the pure heart. And they will say something to you like, oh, the Word of God was so special today. It changed my life. God changed me. And God helped me through your message. You know what you do? You go back to your room and you get alone. And you build an altar. And you pray a prayer like this. God, you remember what the lady that was wearing the yellow dress today, that you remember what she said, how the Word of God was so special. She had never heard anything like that. It changed her life. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about you. And you build an altar and you offer what she says to God. You have to do that. If you don't do that, and you begin to lift it up in your own pride, then it can destroy you. David took the water and he pours it out before the Lord. It's a sacrifice. It's an altar that he makes there that day because he said, nobody deserves worship but God alone. And so he gives it all to God. May God teach us that lesson. The lesson is we should never touch God's glory. It doesn't belong to us. And when people offer us things like these men have offered to David, understand, I don't deserve this. I'm not worthy of this. And so you take and turn it into a worship experience. And you give it to the only one that rightfully it belongs to. It belongs to God. That's what David is doing. Some people may consider that strange, but it's not. David knew the heart of God, and he knew that he was not worthy of what these men had done and risking their lives for him to give him a drink of water. So when that happens in your life, and God uses your life in a great way, never stop to give God glory. Build you an altar. Take whatever it is and turn it into an act of worship. And if you do so, God can continue to use your life.